So before we start, I just have a question because I'm not good at estimating sizes. How long do you guys think this room is? Like, how long is it? Ish. It doesn't matter for how accurate we are, but 40 feet? 45, somewhere in there. Okay, how wide? 40, same, so it's kind of square. And then how tall? 20, 25, 15, somewhere we're kind of in that neighborhood. Okay, all right. I'm going to use those numbers later, but I just was like, well, I don't know how big it is. I'll just ask. For nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places and there will be famines. Right? That sounds like the evening news. You know? Pandemic, climate catastrophe. Institutions we thought we could count on, like democracy and capitalism and vaccination, seem to be getting knocked apart. Ask people what the end of the world looks like, and at least some of us will say, kind of looks like this. Now, you guys know me. You know I read commentary every week to deepen my understanding of Scripture. I tried to read from a variety of viewpoints, including material that was written over time. And everything I read this week said pretty much the same thing. Jesus' description of the end of the world looks like my world. The end of World War II, 9/11, Hurricane Katrina, all of those were referenced in the material that I read this week as signs of the end of the world. Now, the Gospel of Mark, which is where the reading came from today, appears to have been written sometime around 70 CE, AD, however you do that time thing. There was a war between the Romans and the Jews that ran from 66 to 70, during which the Romans tore down the temple in Jerusalem. Now, I know in today's reading the disciples say how large the stones were. But according to Josephus, who's a Jewish historian who also led troops against the Romans, some of the stones in the temple were 40 feet long by 12 feet high by 18 feet deep. So picture a stone that is half the size of this sanctuary. How badly do you want to destroy a building if you are willing to break up a stone that is that large using nothing but human muscle? No explosives, nothing but rage and sledgehammers. So the people who first hear the Gospel of Mark would also have recognized the end of the world in the world they were looking at. This passage, Mark 13, where Jesus talks about the end of the world, it is the longest speech Jesus gives in the Gospel of Mark. It's also how Jesus says farewell to his disciples in Mark. Now, in the Gospel of John, Jesus asks his disciples to love one another, to love God, to love their neighbors. In the Gospels of Luke and Matthew, Jesus asks his disciples to love the other, to love the Gentile, to love the stranger in your midst. But in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus asks his disciples to be aware, to stay alert, to watch. They need that awareness because Jesus warns them, many will lead them astray. And isn't that familiar? Right now, in the midst of all the signs of the ending of the world, aren't there recruiters who are trying to lead us astray? Hate this person, mock that person, bully someone else. If you don't agree with them, you have every right to make them miserable. Or the recruiters say something like this: well, if you really cared about whatever, you would join my organization and go to work. And if we're not aware, away we'll go, right? Mocking and bullying and organizing without reflection on what we're doing. We're looking at the signs and the portents, but we're not looking at what the goal of living should be. It is so easy to point to the big buildings and be impressed, right? The big house, or the fancy car, or the impressive title at work. And even if you don't play those games, and I will say, I imagine quite a few of you don't play those games, there's something that impresses you. I'm pretty sure very few people in this room know what a John James Petite 28 is, but I can tell you as a needlewoman, I'm impressed. And maybe a little jealous. Today's reading comes right after the story about the widow who put her 2 pennies in the collection box at the temple. Jesus has looked at what the temple is offering and feels that it is falling short. It's not taking care of the widows and the orphans and the strangers among us. Jesus wants us to be aware when we are pursuing quantity instead of quality in our life. If we look at the quality of our life, we are looking at the goal of life. Otherwise, we're just living in a world full of stones thrown down into ruins because we focus on the signs of destruction and not on the goal of life. Now, we're starting our annual stewardship campaign this week, and it has been a tough year. We keep thinking we've turned a corner and we'll be back to normal, and normal doesn't seem to show up. But here's the thing I would argue. As a church, we have tried to keep our focus on the goal, keeping alert to the needs of the community, taking care of each other, not getting too caught up in all the recruiters pulling us away from the true goal. Our stewardship campaign this year will be shorter than normal, so we'll need you to get your pledge forms in more quickly if we are to get our budget together in time for annual meeting. But more than that, we need you to get your pledge forms in, because that's one way of focusing on the quality of our lives. What are we giving our financial support to? How are we showing that we're focusing on the true goal of life? Because wars and famines and stones getting knocked over are not the end. Jesus says this must take place, but the end is still to come. Now, maybe the end is Jesus returning in a sunburst. Maybe the end is some kind of wrap-up where we hope we are still at our posts, doing what God called us to do. Maybe the end is something intensely personal. When we encounter Christ at the end of a severe personal trial, where our own self-understanding has been the thing that was knocked down, and we meet the Son of Man in our own personal Galilee. But whatever the end is, we know that salvation is a process. We move from darkness to light, from guilt to pardon, from slavery to freedom, from fear of hostile powers to liberty and assurance. We receive salvation through God's grace. That's the ending that is promised to us all, no matter what the world